My uncle Theodore said this while I was literally holding the quarterly profit reports that showed our family's restaurant empire had grown by 340% under my financial management. While I was wearing the same navy blazer I'd worn to Harvard Business School, while sitting in the boardroom of Castellano Holdings, the company I'd been secretly funding and legally co-owning for the past 8 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Vivian Castellano, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me, because what my Uncle Theodore and the rest of my family discovered in that mahogany-paneled conference room in downtown Millbrook changed everything about respect, assumptions, and what happens when you underestimate the quiet woman taking notes in the corner. But let me start from the moment that shattered everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. It was a Tuesday morning in October when I received the email that would change my life forever. Not a text, not a phone call, a formal, cold email from my cousin Daniel with the subject line, "Family Business Restructuring. Your input not required." I opened it while sitting in my corner office at Meridian Financial, where I'd been working as a senior investment analyst for the past 4 years. The message was brief, brutal, and bureaucratic. Vivian, the family has decided to move forward with the expansion of Castellano Holdings without your involvement. We appreciate your past contributions, but this next phase requires more experienced business minds. Uncle Theodore will be taking over all financial decisions moving forward. No need to attend Thursday's board meeting. Regards, Daniel. I stared at that email for a full 10 minutes, reading it over and over, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Past contributions? More experienced business minds? I was the one who had saved Castellano Holdings from bankruptcy 3 years ago. I was the one who restructured their debt, negotiated better supplier contracts, and created the expansion strategy that turned their single, struggling restaurant in Little Italy into a chain of 12 successful locations across 3 states. I was the one who worked weekends analyzing market trends, who stayed up until 2 a.m. reviewing lease agreements, who used my own savings to cover payroll when times were tight. But apparently, I was also the one whose input was not required. I closed my laptop, walked to my office window, and stared down at the bustling streets of downtown Millbrook 40 floors below. People scurried along the sidewalks like ants, each carrying their own burdens, their own dreams, their own betrayals. I wondered how many of them had ever been dismissed by their own blood with the casual cruelty of a form letter. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars for Meridian's clients, being told by my family that I wasn't qualified to help with their small restaurant chain. I had an MBA from Harvard, a CFA certification, and a track record that had earned me respect in one of the most competitive industries in the world. But to the Castellano family, I was still just little Vivian who used to help Nana count the register at the end of busy nights. That evening, I called my sister Francesca, hoping she might have some insight into this sudden family coup. "Frankie," I said when she picked up on the 4th ring, "did you know about Daniel's email?" There was a pause, the kind of pause that tells you everything you need to know. "Viv, listen," she said, and I could hear her twins crying in the background. "Maybe it's for the best. You've got your own career now, your own life. The restaurant business it's complicated. It's not really your world anymore." "Not my world?" I couldn't hide the disbelief in my voice. "Frankie, I literally saved the business. I restructured everything. I know, she interrupted. "And everyone's grateful. But Uncle Theodore has been in business for 30 years. He knows restaurants. He knows the family dynamics. Maybe it's time to let the men handle the heavy lifting." Let the men handle the heavy lifting. My sister, my own sister, had just reduced 8 years of my expertise, education, and sacrifice to needing the men to handle things. The sister who used to dream with me about expanding Nana's single restaurant into an empire. The sister who cheered when I got into Harvard. The sister who once told me I was the smartest person in our family. Okay, I said quietly. I understand. But I didn't understand. And more importantly, I didn't accept it. After I hung up with Francesca, I poured myself a glass of Chianti, the same vintage we served at our flagship restaurant, and sat in my apartment overlooking Riverside Park. The autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson, and the evening light cast long shadows across my living room floor. I thought about Nana Rosalina, who had started it all with her tiny restaurant on Mulberry Street in 1987. How she used to let me help her make fresh pasta on Sunday mornings, her weathered hands guiding mine as we rolled out sheets of dough. She taught me to read people by watching how they ate. Quick and distracted meant stress, slow and savoring meant contentment, picking at food meant heartbreak. Vivian, she used to say in her heavily accented English, in this family, we take care of each other. But first, you take care of yourself, because if you don't know your own worth, nobody else will either. Nana had died 5 years ago, leaving behind her recipes, her restaurant, and a family that was supposed to honor her legacy. But somewhere along the way, that legacy had become a boys' club where my contributions were tolerated rather than valued. I opened my laptop and began researching. Not out of anger. I'd learned long ago that anger was a luxury I couldn't afford in the financial world, but out of curiosity. I wanted to understand the legal structure of Castellano Holdings, the ownership percentages, the decision-making hierarchy. I wanted to see exactly where I stood in the family business I had helped build. What I found in the next 3 hours would change everything. But let me first take you back to where this all began, because the betrayal I felt that Tuesday evening had roots that went much deeper than a single dismissive email. When I graduated from Millbrook High School as valedictorian in 2012, I had 2 choices: accept a full scholarship to State University and stay close to family, or take out loans to attend Harvard Business School and chase the dreams that kept me awake at night. My parents, good, hardworking people who ran a small accounting firm, encouraged the safe choice. Why do you need Harvard? My father asked. State has a perfectly good business program, and you could help with the restaurant part-time. But I could see myself in 10 years if I stayed, trapped in a life that was perfectly fine, but never extraordinary. So I chose Harvard, chose the debt, chose the uncertainty. The first year was brutal. I worked in the dining hall, tutored undergrads in economics, and spent my summers waiting tables at high-end restaurants in Boston to understand the hospitality industry from the ground up. I ate ramen for dinner and wore the same 3 blazers in rotation. My classmates went on spring break trips to Europe, while I went home to Millbrook to help Nona prep for Easter Sunday service. But I survived, and more than that, I excelled. By my second year, I was selected for the Harvard Business Review, and my thesis on family business succession planning won the Dean's Award for Innovation in Corporate Strategy. When I graduated in 2016, I had job offers from 3 major investment firms. I chose Meridian Financial because they had a reputation for working with family-owned businesses, and I thought, naively as it turns out, that this experience would help me contribute more meaningfully to Castellano Holdings. For 4 years, I sent money home whenever the restaurants needed it. When the original location needed new kitchen equipment, I covered it. When they wanted to expand to their second location in Westbury, I helped secure the loan by co-signing and putting up my own assets as collateral. When the pandemic hit and restaurants everywhere were closing, I used my industry connections to help them pivot to delivery and takeout models that kept them profitable. I never asked for recognition. I never demanded a formal role. I just helped because that's what family does. But here's what I didn't realize. Every time I sent money, every time I co-signed a loan, every time I helped structure a deal, I was building something much more significant than gratitude. I was building legal ownership. The revelation came at 11:47 p.m. on that Tuesday night, buried in a PDF document I found in my personal files, a copy of the loan agreement I'd co-signed for the Westbury expansion in 2018. I'd kept it for tax purposes, but never read the fine print carefully. Section 7.3 of the agreement stated that any cosigner who contributed more than 25% of the total capital investment would be entitled to proportional equity ownership upon loan maturity or default. Section 7.4 clarified that contributed capital included not only direct monetary investment, but also guaranteed loans, equipment purchases, and substantial business consulting services provided without compensation. I grabbed my calculator and started adding up 4 years of contributions. The kitchen equipment loan I'd guaranteed, $45,000. The Westbury expansion I co-signed, $180,000. The working capital I'd provided during the pandemic, $75,000. The equipment I'd purchased directly, $35,000. But the big number, the one that made my heart skip, was the substantial business consulting services I'd provided. Market analysis, financial planning, operational restructuring, strategic planning. At my standard Meridian billing rate of $350 per hour, the past 4 years represented approximately $280,000 in pro bono work. Total contributed capital, $615,000. I pulled up the corporate filings for Castellano Holdings. Total company valuation based on their most recent loan application, $1.2 million. $615,000 out of $1.2 million. 51%. I owned 51% of the family business that had just told me my input was not required. I sat back in my chair, staring at the numbers on my screen, feeling something I hadn't felt since the day I graduated from Harvard Business School. Power. Not the kind of power that comes from anger or revenge, but the quiet, steady power that comes from knowing exactly where you stand. Uncle Theodore thought women didn't understand money. My cousin Daniel thought I wasn't experienced enough for business decisions. My sister Francesca thought it was time to let the men handle the heavy lifting. But none of them understood what I'd been building all these years. While they saw my contributions as charity, little Vivian helping out the family, I'd been creating a paper trail that told a very different story. A story where the quiet woman taking notes in the corner wasn't just an observer. She was the owner. I closed my laptop, finished my wine, and looked out at the lights of Millbrook twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere across town, my family was probably planning their Thursday board meeting, making decisions about the future of a company they thought they controlled. They had no idea that the future was sitting in a riverside apartment wearing pajamas and a Harvard Business School t-shirt with a calculator full of numbers that would change everything. Thursday was 3 days away. 3 days to decide how I wanted to handle this revelation. 3 days to choose between staying quiet and letting them continue to underestimate me, or walking into that boardroom and showing them exactly who owned 51% of Castellano Holdings. I thought about Nona Rosalina's words, "If you don't know your own worth, nobody else will either." For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I was worth. And more importantly, I knew exactly what I owned. The only question now was what I was going to do about it. Wednesday morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes after a sleepless night spent staring at ceiling fans and calculating percentages. I had exactly 24 hours before the board meeting I wasn't invited to, the meeting where my family planned to restructure their business without consulting the woman who actually owned 51% of it. But I wasn't going to walk into that boardroom unprepared. If there's one thing Harvard Business School teaches you, it's that knowledge without strategy is just expensive trivia. And if there's one thing the financial world teaches you, it's that documentation beats emotion every single time. I called in sick to Meridian, the first sick day I'd taken in 2 years, and spent the morning in my apartment with a pot of strong coffee, my laptop, and every piece of paperwork I could find related to Castellano Holdings. What I discovered over the next 8 hours would have made my business law professor proud and my family very, very nervous. See, I hadn't just been sending money home over the years. I'd been creating what lawyers call a paper trail of ownership interest. Every bank transfer had a memo line. Every co-signed loan had my signature next to specific terms. Every piece of equipment I'd purchased had receipts showing my name as the buyer. Every hour of consulting work I'd done had been documented in emails where I outlined strategies, provided market analysis, and made recommendations that the family had implemented. In the business world, this is called sweat equity, and it's legally binding. But the real smoking gun was buried in an email thread from 2019 that I'd almost forgotten about. During the pandemic, when restaurants everywhere were struggling, I'd sent Uncle Theodore a detailed business plan for pivoting to delivery and takeout. The plan included everything: new POS systems, partnerships with delivery apps, menu modifications, staff retraining, marketing strategies. At the bottom of that email, I'd written, "I'm happy to implement this plan personally if you'd like to formalize my role in the company. Let me know what percentage of ownership would be appropriate for this level of involvement." Theodore's response, sent from his personal email account, was sitting right there in my inbox. "Vivian, your family. Don't worry about percentages. Just help us survive this mess. We'll take care of you when things get better. You have my word that your contributions won't be unnoticed or unrewarded." I stared at that email for a long time. "We'll take care of you. Your contributions won't be unnoticed." In business terms, this was what we call a promissory statement of future compensation. Combined with my documented capital contributions and the loan co-signing agreements, it created what's legally known as a legitimate expectation of ownership interest. But I needed more than emails and receipts. I needed professional validation. At 2 p.m., I walked into the offices of Sterling and Associates, the law firm that handled Meridian's corporate contracts. I'd worked with their senior partner, Rebecca Sterling, on several client acquisitions, and she owed me a favor after I helped her navigate a particularly complex restaurant chain merger the previous year. "Vivian," Rebecca said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from her mahogany desk, "what brings you here? Please tell me Meridian isn't trying to poach you with a contract dispute?" I smiled and placed a folder on her desk. "Actually, this is personal. Family business situation. I need someone to review some documents and tell me where I stand legally." Rebecca opened the folder and began reading. Her eyebrows rose higher with each page. "How long has this been going on?" she asked after 20 minutes. "About 8 years." "And they've never acknowledged your ownership stake?" "They've never acknowledged anything. Until yesterday, they were treating me like the family charity case who occasionally helps out." Rebecca leaned back in her chair and tapped her pen against her lips, a gesture I recognized from our previous negotiations. It meant she was calculating something significant. "Vivian," she said finally, "based on what I'm seeing here, you don't just have a case for partial ownership. You have a case for majority controlling interest. These loan documents, combined with your capital contributions and documented sweat equity, give you a legitimate claim to 51% of this company." That's what I calculated. But there's more. This email from your uncle, the one where he promises future compensation for your contributions, that's legally binding in New York State. It's what we call an implied contract. Combined with your pattern of investment and their pattern of acceptance, you could argue that they've been operating under an informal partnership agreement for years. My heart started beating faster. What does that mean practically? It means that if you wanted to, you could walk into their boardroom tomorrow and legally take control of the company. You could outvote them on any decision. You could restructure management. You could even dissolve the current corporate structure and reform it under your leadership. I sat quietly for a moment, absorbing this information.
But, Rebecca continued, I'm assuming you don't want to destroy your family relationships, so let's talk strategy. Rebecca pulled out a legal pad and started sketching organizational charts. Here's what I recommend. You have 3 options. Option 1, you quietly assert your ownership stake and negotiate for formal recognition and a management role. This is the diplomatic approach. Option 2, you file formal paperwork claiming your majority interest and force them to acknowledge your ownership through legal channels. This is the nuclear option. It would protect your interests, but it might damage relationships permanently. And option 3? Rebecca smiled, the kind of smile that told me why she was one of the most successful corporate attorneys in Millbrook.
Option 3 is what I call the boardroom surprise. You show up to their meeting tomorrow with full documentation of your ownership claim. You don't make threats, you don't demand immediate changes, you simply present the facts and let them understand the new reality. Then, you give them the opportunity to restructure things voluntarily. What's the advantage of that approach? Psychological impact. Right now, they think they're in control. They think they can make decisions without you. But when you walk into that room and calmly demonstrate that you're actually the majority owner, it shifts the entire power dynamic. They'll have to negotiate with you because they'll realize they don't have a choice. I thought about Uncle Theodore's dismissive comment about women not understanding money. I thought about Daniel's email telling me my input wasn't required. I thought about Francesca's suggestion that it was time to let the men handle the heavy lifting. I like option 3, I said. Rebecca nodded. I thought you might. Now, let's prepare your presentation. We spent the next 3 hours crafting what Rebecca called a ownership documentation package. It included copies of every loan agreement, every bank transfer, every equipment purchase receipt, and every email that demonstrated my involvement in business decisions. She also prepared a legal brief outlining the basis for my ownership claim under New York State partnership law. The final document was 15 pages long and absolutely devastating. It told the story of how a Harvard MBA had systematically built a majority ownership stake in a family restaurant empire while being treated like a junior consultant. One more thing, Rebecca said as I prepared to leave. Do you want me there tomorrow? At the family meeting? Sometimes having legal representation present helps people understand the seriousness of a situation. It also prevents things from getting too emotional. I considered this. Having Rebecca there would send a clear message that this wasn't just family drama. It was a business transaction. But it might also feel like bringing a gun to a knife fight. Let me think about it. I'll call you in the morning. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove to Little Italy and sat in my car outside Nonna Rosalina's original restaurant, the one that had started everything. The dinner rush was in full swing. Through the windows, I could see families sharing plates of pasta, couples toasting with wine, children drawing on paper plate mats with crayons. The same scene that had played out thousands of times since 1987. I thought about what Nana would say if she could see what her little restaurant had become. 12 locations across 3 states, employing over 200 people, serving thousands of customers every week. Would she be proud? Would she understand the business decisions I'd made? Would she support what I was about to do? My phone buzzed with a text message from Francesca. Heard from Daniel that you might show up tomorrow. Please don't make a scene. This is about family. This is about family. I stared at that message for a long time because she was right. This was about family. It was about a family that took my money, my expertise, and my loyalty for granted. It was about a family that thought they could exclude me from decisions about a business I'd helped build. It was about a family that needed to learn the difference between being related to someone and respecting them. I texted back, "See you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Then I drove home, laid out my best suit, the charcoal gray one I wore for client presentations, and went to bed early. Thursday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of October day that makes you believe in new beginnings. I woke up at 6 a.m., went for a run along the river, showered, and dressed carefully. Professional but not aggressive, confident but not confrontational. At 8 a.m., I called Rebecca. "I've decided," I said. "I want you there." "Good choice. I'll meet you in the lobby of their building at 9:45.
And Vivian? Yeah? Remember, you're not asking for permission, you're informing them of reality. There's a difference. At 9:30, I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment one last time. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same person who had received that dismissive email 3 days ago. That woman had been operating from a place of hurt and uncertainty. This woman was operating from a place of documented legal authority. I picked up my briefcase, the leather one I'd bought myself as a graduation gift from Harvard, and checked its contents one final time. Ownership documentation package, calculator, business cards, and one more thing. A printed copy of the email where Uncle Theodore had promised that my contributions would not be unnoticed or unrewarded. Because today, I was going to make sure he kept that promise. The Castellano Holdings offices occupied the third floor of a converted brownstone in downtown Millbrook's business district. I'd been there dozens of times over the years, usually for informal family gatherings that doubled as business discussions. But I'd never walked through those doors as anything other than Theodore's niece, who helped with numbers sometimes. Today, I was walking in as the majority owner of the company. Rebecca met me in the lobby as planned. She was carrying her own briefcase and wearing the kind of sharp navy suit that immediately communicated serious legal representation. Ready? More than ready. We took the elevator to the third floor in comfortable silence. As the doors opened, I could hear familiar voices coming from the conference room. Uncle Theodore's booming laugh, Daniel's voice explaining something with the kind of confidence that comes from never being challenged, and my father's quieter tone asking questions about quarterly projections. They were discussing the future of a company they didn't realize they didn't control. Rebecca and I walked down the hallway toward the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see the whole family gathered around the mahogany table. Theodore at the head, Daniel to his right with laptops and spreadsheets, my father and my Uncle Vincent flanking them, Francesca taking notes in the corner.
The same corner where I'd sat for years, quietly contributing ideas that were implemented without credit. I paused outside the door and took a deep breath. "Remember," Rebecca whispered, "you belong here more than any of them." I knocked twice and opened the door. "Good morning, everyone," I said calmly. "Sorry I'm a few minutes late. I brought some documents I thought you'd want to review." The room fell silent. 7 pairs of eyes stared at me, then at Rebecca, then back at me. Uncle Theodore was the first to speak. "Vivian, I thought Daniel explained that we were handling this meeting internally." I smiled and took a seat at the opposite end of the table from him. "Oh, he did. But it turns out this is more internal than anyone realized." I opened my briefcase and placed the ownership documentation package in the center of the table. "As it happens," I said, "I am internal. In fact, I'm the majority stakeholder." And just like that, everything changed. The silence in that conference room stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 seconds. I watched as 7 faces processed what I just said, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief to something approaching panic. Uncle Theodore was the first to recover, though his usual commanding presence seemed suddenly diminished. "Vivian, what exactly are you talking about? Majority stakeholder in what?" I gestured to Rebecca, who opened her briefcase with the practice efficiency of someone who delivered similar surprises in dozens of boardrooms. "May I introduce Rebecca Sterling from Sterling and Associates," I said calmly. "She's here to help clarify the legal structure of Castellano Holdings." Daniel's laptop made a small clicking sound as he closed it, his face pale. "Legal structure? Vivian, this is a family meeting, not a—" "Actually," Rebecca interrupted smoothly, "this is a board meeting of a corporation in which Ms. Castellano holds majority ownership. So, yes, legal representation is not only appropriate, it's necessary." My father cleared his throat nervously. "Vivian, honey, I think there might be some confusion here. You're not an official part of the business structure. You help out sometimes and we're grateful, but—" "Dad," I said, opening the documentation package, "let me show you exactly how official my involvement has been."
I spread the loan documents across the mahogany table, like a poker player revealing a royal flush. Each page was marked with bright yellow tabs highlighting the relevant sections. This is the co-signing agreement for the Westbury expansion in 2018, I said, pointing to the first document. Section 7.3 states that any co-signer contributing more than 25% of total capital investment receives proportional equity ownership. I guaranteed $180,000 on a $300,000 project. Theodore leaned forward, squinting at the document. Now, wait just a minute. That was just a formality to help with the bank approval. You weren't actually investing? I pulled out a second set of papers. These are the bank transfers from my personal account to Castellano Holdings. $75,000 in working capital during the pandemic, $45,000 for the kitchen equipment at the original location, $35,000 for the new POS systems across all locations. Francesca had gone completely white. Viv, you never said those were investments. You said you were helping family. I was helping family, but helping family doesn't negate the legal implications of those transfers. I pulled out another document. Especially when combined with this. The email printout landed on the table with a soft whisper that somehow felt deafening. Uncle Theodore's own words, printed in black and white. Don't worry about percentages, just help us survive this mess. We'll take care of you when things get better. You have my word that your contributions won't be unnoticed or unrewarded. Theodore stared at the email as if it were written in a foreign language. That was just, I was being encouraging. Family support. Rebecca leaned forward with the kind of smile that probably terrified opposing counsel for 2 decades. Mr. Castellano, in New York State, that email constitutes what we call an implied contract. Combined with Ms. Castellano's documented pattern of capital investment and operational involvement, it creates a legally binding partnership agreement. Partnership agreement? Daniel's voice cracked slightly. What are you talking about? There's no partnership agreement. Actually, there is, Rebecca continued, pulling out a thick legal brief. It's called an implied partnership by conduct, when one party consistently contributes capital, expertise, and labor to a business venture, while the other parties accept those contributions and promise future compensation. The law recognizes that as a binding business relationship. I watched Uncle Theodore's face cycle through several emotions: anger, confusion, fear, and finally a kind of grudging calculation. He was starting to understand that this wasn't just family drama. This was a business transaction that had been happening for 8 years without him realizing it. Let me get this straight, he said slowly. You're saying that because you loaned us money and helped with some business decisions, you own half our company? Not half, I corrected. Based on total capital contributions, documented consulting work, and proportional equity calculations, I own 51%, which means I don't just have a voice in company decisions, I have the controlling voice. Vincent, who had been silent until now, suddenly laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. This is insane! Vivian, you can't just walk in here with some lawyer and claim you own our restaurants. This is family business, not some corporate takeover. Uncle Vincent, I said, with my voice still calm, but with an edge that surprised even me. With respect, I didn't claim anything. I documented everything. Every dollar, every decision, every late night I spent restructuring your debt or analyzing your market position. The only thing that's changed is that now you know what I've been building all these years. Francesca finally found her voice. But why? Why didn't you ever say anything about ownership or percentages or any of this legal stuff? We thought you were just being generous.
I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw not just confusion, but genuine hurt. She felt betrayed, as if I'd been lying to the family for years. In her mind, I'd been playing some kind of long game, secretly accumulating power while pretending to be the supportive family member. "Frankie," I said softly, "3 days ago, Daniel sent me an email telling me that my input wasn't required for the future of this company. Yesterday, you told me it was time to let the men handle the heavy lifting. 2 hours ago, Uncle Theodore said that women don't understand money." I gestured to the document spread across the table. These numbers tell a different story. They tell the story of a woman who understood money well enough to save your company from bankruptcy, who understood business well enough to help you expand from 1 location to 12, who understood legal structures well enough to protect her investments while helping her family. Theodore's face was turning red, the same shade it used to turn when I was 8 years old and accidentally broke one of Nona's good plates. "So what?" he demanded. "What exactly do you want here, Vivian? You want to be CEO? You want to fire everyone and run things yourself? What's your endgame?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since Tuesday night. What did I want? Rebecca had prepared me for this moment. "The beauty of majority ownership," she'd explained, "is that you get to decide what you want. You can take operational control, you can demand board representation, you can restructure management, or you can negotiate for whatever arrangement serves your interests best. But sitting in that conference room, looking at my family's faces, angry, confused, frightened, I realized that what I wanted wasn't revenge or control or even recognition. What I wanted was respect. "Here's what I want," I said, standing up and walking to the whiteboard where Daniel had been outlining their expansion plans. "I want a formal seat on this board. Not as Theodore's niece who helps with numbers, but as the majority stakeholder with voting authority on all major decisions." I picked up a marker and began writing. "I want my financial contributions formally recognized in the corporate structure. I want my name on the ownership documents. I want my expertise valued rather than tolerated." Daniel started to object, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. I also want transparency. Real financial reports, real strategic planning meetings, real input on expansion decisions, staffing choices, and operational changes." I turned back to face the table. "In exchange, I'm willing to maintain the current management structure. Theodore, you can remain CEO. Daniel, you can keep your operations role. Vincent, you can continue managing the original location, but decisions get made by the board, not by the boys' club." The room was quiet except for the sound of Theodore's heavy breathing and the distant hum of traffic from the street below. My father was the first to speak, his voice carefully neutral. "And if we don't agree to these terms?" Rebecca answered before I could. "Then Miss Castellano exercises her majority ownership rights through the courts, which means she could potentially dissolve the current corporate structure, remove existing management, and restructure the company entirely under her leadership." "You'd really do that?" Francesca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'd really destroy the family business over this?" I sat back down and looked directly at my sister. "Frankie, I didn't destroy anything. I built something. For 8 years, I built something while being told I wasn't good enough, smart enough, or experienced enough to have a real voice in decisions. I saved this company with my money, my expertise, and my connections. And in return, I got treated like the family charity case." I gestured to the documents on the table. "These papers don't destroy the family business. They reveal who actually built it." Uncle Theodore leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since I'd entered the room, he looked less like the commanding family patriarch and more like what he actually was, a man who had spent 8 years accepting help he couldn't afford to repay. "How long have you known?" he asked, quietly. "Known what?" "That you could do this, that you had this kind of leverage." I thought about his question carefully, because the truth was complicated. I've known the numbers for 3 days, but I've known I was building something for 3 years. Theodore, every time you implemented one of my suggestions, every time you used my market analysis to make a decision, every time you accepted my money to solve a problem, you were acknowledging that I understood this business better than you wanted to admit. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages. 6 months ago, when you were deciding whether to expand into Connecticut, you called me at 11 p.m. asking for projections on market penetration and competitor analysis. I spent an entire weekend building spreadsheets and researching demographics. I looked up from my phone. But when it came time to announce the expansion, it was Theodore Castellano's strategic vision. My work, his vision. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We always credited your contributions in family discussions. Family discussions aren't board minutes, and gratitude isn't equity. The conference room fell silent again. Through the large windows, I could see people walking on the sidewalk below, going about their normal Thursday morning routines, unaware that 3 floors above them, a family business was being redefined by documents and percentages and 8 years of accumulated resentment. Vincent cleared his throat. So what happens now? Do we vote on your proposal? I looked around the table at 6 people who had suddenly realized they were no longer in control of their own family legacy. Actually, I said, we don't vote. I decide. That's what majority ownership means. Theodore's face was now approaching purple. So this was all just theater? You've already made up your mind?
No, Theodore, this was education. I wanted you to understand exactly where things stand before I made any decisions. I stood up and gathered the documents back into my briefcase. Here's what's going to happen. I'm giving you 1 week to think about my proposal. Board representation, formal recognition, transparent operations. 1 week to decide if you want to work with me or if you'd prefer to work for me. Rebecca stood as well, closing her briefcase with an authoritative snap. My office will send over the formal paperwork tomorrow, she said. Corporate restructuring documents that reflect Mrs. Castellano's actual ownership percentage. You can review them with your own counsel. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. One more thing. The next time you have a board meeting about the future of Castellano Holdings, you'll send me an invitation. Not an email telling me my input isn't required. An invitation. Because this is my company too. In fact, legally speaking, it's mostly my company. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, Rebecca beside me. Behind us, the conference room erupted in voices. Angry, confused, desperate voices trying to make sense of a reality that had shifted beneath their feet. As the elevator doors closed, I heard Uncle Theodore's voice rising above the others. How the hell did we let this happen? And for the first time in 3 days, I smiled. Because the answer was simple. They let it happen by underestimating the quiet woman in the corner who understood money better than they ever imagined. The week that followed the boardroom confrontation was unlike anything I'd experienced in my 8 years of working in high-stakes finance. At Meridian, when we delivered shocking news to clients, market crashes, hostile takeovers, massive losses, there was always a period of radio silence before the storm of phone calls, emergency meetings, and damage control. But this was different. This was family. And family, as I learned that week, doesn't observe professional boundaries. The first call came at 6:47 a.m. on Friday morning, less than 24 hours after I'd walked out of that conference room. My phone buzzed me awake with Francesca's name on the screen. "Vivian, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "The kids want to know why Uncle Theodore was crying at dinner last night." I sat up in bed, instantly alert. Theodore was crying? He came over after you left yesterday, just sat at our kitchen table and kept saying, "I don't understand how this happened," over and over. "Viv, what did you do to him?" What did I do to him? The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. What I'd done was show him 8 years of legal documents proving I owned his company. What he'd done was spend 8 years taking my money, my expertise, and my loyalty while treating me like an inconvenient relative who occasionally helped with math problems. I showed him reality. That's all. Reality? You devastated him. He looked like someone had died. I got out of bed and walked to my kitchen, needing coffee for this conversation. Maybe someone did die. Maybe his assumption that he could control the family business without acknowledging who actually built it. There was a long pause. Then Francesca's voice, smaller and more vulnerable than I'd heard it since we were children. Did you really mean it? About the 51%? Every word. And you're really gonna, what? Take over? Fire people? I poured water into my coffee maker and measured out grounds with the same precision I used for financial analysis. Everything about that week required precision. Frankie, I offered them partnership, real partnership, with real respect and real recognition. I didn't threaten to fire anyone. I asked for a seat at the table I helped build. But if they say no? I pressed the brew button and listened to the familiar gurgle of hot water meeting coffee grounds. She was quiet for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Frankie? I'm here. I'm just processing. 8 years, Viv. 8 years you've been planning this. I hadn't been planning anything. I've been contributing to a family business that I thought valued my contributions. The planning part started 3 days ago when I realized they didn't. Another long pause. Then, Mom wants to have lunch with you today. Our mother. The woman who had always been caught in the middle of family drama, smoothing over conflicts with homemade lasagna and careful diplomacy. I could imagine her distress at seeing her brother-in-law in tears and her daughters on opposite sides of a business dispute. Tell Mom I'm free at noon. But Frankie? Yeah? This isn't about taking sides. This is about business. Legal, documented business relationships. I know, she said quietly. That's what scares me. The call with my mother 3 hours later was exactly what I expected. A carefully orchestrated attempt at emotional manipulation disguised as concerned family outreach. We met at Lucia's, a small Italian cafe downtown that wasn't part of the Castellano Holdings empire. Mom had chosen it deliberately. Neutral territory where we could talk without the weight of business implications. She was already seated when I arrived, nervously stirring sugar into an espresso that probably didn't need it. She looked up when I approached the table, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Hi, sweetheart, she said, standing to hug me. You look tired. I did look tired. I'd spent most of the previous evening reviewing corporate law precedents with Rebecca, preparing for whatever the response the family might have to my ultimatum. It's been an interesting week, I said. Vivian, honey, I need to understand what's happening. Theodore called your father at midnight last night. He was talking about lawyers and ownership documents, and he sounded terrified.
I watched my mother's face as she spoke. Maria Castellano had spent 35 years married to my father, watching him work long hours at his accounting firm to provide for our family. She understood business in the abstract, but she'd never been involved in the kind of high-stakes corporate maneuvering that had consumed my week. Mom, do you remember when I graduated from Harvard? She smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her since I arrived. Of course. We were so proud. You looked so professional in your cap and gown. Do you remember what I said I wanted to do with my MBA? Her smile faded slightly. You said you wanted to help family businesses succeed. You said too many good companies failed because they didn't understand modern financial management. And what did I do after graduation? You got that job at Meridian Financial. She paused. And you started helping with the restaurants. I started investing in the restaurants, Mom. There's a difference. I pulled out my phone and showed her a spreadsheet I'd created the night before. Simple numbers, color-coded for clarity. This shows every dollar I've contributed to Castellano Holdings over the past 8 years. $615,000 in direct investment, loan guarantees, and documented consulting work. She stared at the screen, her lips moving silently as she read the numbers. Mom,
I didn't loan this money to Uncle Theodore. I invested it. And under New York State business law, that makes me a partner in the company. But Theodore never said. Theodore never understood what was happening. He saw his niece helping family. I was building a business relationship. My mother set down her espresso cup with shaking hands. Vivian, what do you want from us? From the family? It was the same question Theodore had asked in the boardroom, but coming from my mother, it sounded different, less defensive, more genuinely confused. I want what I've always wanted, Mom. I want to be treated like the Harvard-educated business professional I am, instead of like Theodore's niece who's good with numbers. I want my contributions acknowledged. I want a voice in decisions about a company I've helped build. And if they can't give you that, I met her eyes directly. Then I'll run the company myself. She was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Finally, she reached across the table and took my hand. Sweetheart, I love you. Your father loves you. But this is going to tear the family apart. Mom, the family was already torn apart. I just documented it. The weekend brought more calls, more attempts at negotiation and emotional pressure. Daniel called Saturday morning, trying to sound reasonable and businesslike while proposing a compromise that involved me accepting a junior advisory role in exchange for dropping my ownership claims. Vincent called Saturday afternoon, alternating between fury and pleading as he described how devastating it would be for his employees if I took over the original location. But the call that surprised me came Sunday evening, from my father. Vivian, I've been doing some research, he said without preamble, about business law, partnership agreements. I think I understand what happened. My father, the careful accountant who had spent his career helping small businesses navigate complex financial regulations. Of course he would research the legal implications rather than relying on emotion. What do you think happened, Dad? I think Theodore accepted your investment without understanding that he was creating a business partnership. I think he genuinely believed you were just being generous with family. And now? Now, I think you have every legal right to claim majority ownership. But Vivian, legally right and morally right aren't always the same thing. I walked to my living room window and looked out at the Sunday evening lights of Millbrook. Families were probably gathering for dinner. Children were probably finishing homework. People were probably preparing for another ordinary work week. None of them were dealing with the intersection of family loyalty and corporate law. Dad, what would you do if you were in my position? He was quiet for a moment. I'd probably do exactly what you're doing, but I'd also be terrified that I was destroying something precious while trying to fix something broken. That conversation stayed with me through Sunday night and into Monday morning. By Tuesday, 1 week after I'd walked into that boardroom with Rebecca and my documentation package, I still hadn't heard from Uncle Theodore or Daniel about their decision. At 9 a.m. Tuesday, I made the decision for them. I called Rebecca and asked her to file the formal corporate restructuring paperwork. By noon, the legal documents were in the system. Vivian Castellano, majority owner and CEO of Castellano Holdings, effective immediately. The phone started ringing at 12:47 p.m. Theodore first, his voice hoarse with what sounded like exhaustion. Vivian, what have you done? I've taken control of my company, Theodore. Your company? 40 years I've been building this business. 8 years I've been funding it. The paperwork is filed. I'm calling a board meeting for Thursday morning to discuss the transition. Daniel called an hour later, trying to sound legal and official. You can't just file papers and take over a family business. We'll contest this in court. Feel free to contest it, Daniel, but while you're researching, you might want to look into New York state precedents for implied partnerships. Rebecca assures me the case law is very clear. Francesca's call was the hardest. Viv, you've really done it. You've really torn the family apart. No, Frankie. I've really taken control of a situation that was already broken. But the call that changed everything came Wednesday morning, from someone I wasn't expecting. Carmen Rodriguez, the manager of our most successful location in Westbury. Miss Castellano, I heard about the changes in ownership. I wanted to call and say thank you. I was so surprised I almost dropped my coffee. Thank you for what? For finally bringing real business management to this company. Do you know how long I've been asking for updated POS systems? How many times I've requested staff training programs? How often I've suggested menu improvements that never got implemented?
She paused, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Everyone in management has been talking about your ideas for years. The expansion strategy, the delivery partnerships, the employee benefit programs. We've been hoping someone would finally listen to the person who actually understood how to run a modern restaurant business. That conversation lasted 30 minutes. Carmen told me about operational inefficiencies I hadn't known about, staff complaints that had been ignored, customer feedback that had never reached the family leadership. She painted a picture of a business that had been surviving on tradition and location rather than innovation and management. The staff is excited, she said before we hung up. Not because they don't respect Mr. Theodore, but because they finally feel like someone's listening to ideas instead of just family politics. Thursday morning, I arrived at the Castellano Holdings offices at 9:30 a.m. for the board meeting I had called. This time, I wasn't carrying documentation to prove my ownership. I was carrying plans for the future. The same conference room, the same mahogany table, but everything else had changed. I sat at the head of the table, Theodore's old seat, with Rebecca beside me. Theodore sat to my right, Daniel to my left, Vincent and my father across from me. Francesca had chosen not to attend. Thank you all for coming, I began, opening a folder containing the new corporate structure documents. I know this transition has been difficult, but I want to discuss how we move forward constructively. Theodore looked older than he had the week before, the fight seemingly gone out of him. So, what now, Vivian? You're the boss. What happens to the rest of us? I had prepared for this question, but hearing the defeat in his voice made me choose my words carefully. Theodore, you built something remarkable, starting with Nana's single restaurant. But building something and managing its growth are different skill sets. I'm proposing that you transition to Chairman Aromatis, maintaining your connection to the company's heritage while I handle operational leadership. Daniel leaned forward, his laptop closed in front of him. And the rest of us? Daniel, your operations experience is valuable, but it needs to be channeled through systematic management rather than family hierarchy. I'm offering you the position of Regional Operations Director with clear performance metrics and growth opportunities. I turned to Vincent. Uncle Vincent, the original location is the heart of everything we've built. I want you to remain as manager there, but with increased support for staff training, equipment updates, and menu development. For the first time in 2 weeks, Vincent smiled slightly. Staff training? You mean actual professional development? I mean bringing this business into the 21st century while honoring its traditions. I opened my laptop and projected a presentation onto the conference room screen. Market analysis, expansion projections, staffing plans, technology upgrades, financial forecasts. This is what I see for the next 5 years, I said, clicking through slides that represented months of analysis I had done during evenings and weekends over the past several years. 15 locations by 2028, revenue growth of 30% annually, employee benefit programs that make us competitive with major restaurant chains,
technology integration that improves both customer experience and operational efficiency. Theodore studied the projections with the kind of attention I remembered from my childhood when he would review Nana's daily receipts with the same focused intensity. "These numbers," he said slowly, "you really think we can achieve this kind of growth?" "I know we can, because I've been preparing for this level of growth for 8 years. The meeting lasted 3 hours. We discussed transition timelines, reporting structures, and operational changes. Not once did anyone question my authority or my qualifications. The numbers spoke for themselves, and the numbers said that the quiet woman who used to take notes in the corner had been preparing to run this company better than anyone realized." As people filed out of the conference room, Theodore lingered behind. "Vivian," he said, his voice softer than I had heard him in years, "I owe you an apology." I closed my laptop and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since this whole situation began. "Theodore, you don't owe me an apology for not understanding corporate law, but you do owe me an apology for not respecting my education, my expertise, and my contributions." He nodded slowly. "When you were a little girl, you used to help Nana count the register on Sunday nights. You were maybe 8 years old, but you could add faster in your head than I could with a calculator." I remembered those Sunday evenings, the smell of garlic and basil lingering in the empty restaurant, Nana's gentle hands guiding mine as we sorted bills and coins, the satisfaction of making the numbers balance perfectly.
"I should have seen then what I see now," Theodore continued. "You weren't just good with numbers. You understood the business." "I still understand the business, Theodore. That's why I fought for it." He stood up, extending his hand to me. "Welcome to the family business, CEO Castellano." I shook his hand, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt something other than determination or anger or strategic satisfaction. I felt peace. 6 months later, I stood in the newest Castellano Holdings location in Hartford, Connecticut, watching our staff serve dinner to a packed dining room. The expansion had exceeded projections by 20%. Employee turnover was down 60% from the previous year. Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs across all locations. Carmen Rodriguez had been promoted to Director of Operations, overseeing a team of professional managers who implemented systematic training programs and performance metrics. Daniel had thrived in his new role, freed from the pressure of family politics to focus on what he genuinely enjoyed, ensuring that every location maintained consistent quality standards. Theodore still came to the original location 3 mornings a week, drinking espresso with longtime customers and telling stories about Nona's early days. But now he also attended monthly board meetings, where he listened respectfully as I presented growth strategies and financial projections. The family dynamics had settled into something healthier than what we'd had before. Francesca and I had lunch every other week, gradually rebuilding a relationship that was now based on mutual respect rather than traditional family hierarchy. My parents were proud, genuinely proud, of what I had accomplished, and they'd stopped apologizing to relatives for their daughter's business aggressiveness. But the most satisfying change was personal. I no longer woke up feeling like I had to prove myself worthy of my own family's respect. I no longer sent money hoping to earn love. I no longer sat quietly in corners, taking notes while other people made decisions about work I had done. I had built something that belonged to me, and everyone involved finally understood that. Last week, a reporter from Restaurant Business magazine called to interview me about the remarkable transformation of Castellano Holdings. She wanted to know my secret for taking a traditional family restaurant and turning it into a modern, profitable enterprise. "There's no secret," I told her. "I just applied professional business management to a company that had been running on tradition and hope. I treated it like the valuable asset it was, instead of like a family hobby." "And the ownership transition?"
How did your family react to your taking control? I thought about that question for a long time before answering. My family learned the difference between being related to someone and respecting their expertise. Once they understood that difference, everything became possible. The article came out this month with the headline, How Harvard MBA Vivian Castellano Transformed Her Family's Restaurant Chain into a Multi-Million-Dollar Empire. But the headline I prefer came from Nona's old friend Mrs. Petrucci, who still has dinner at the original location every Sunday evening. She told Carmen to pass along a message. Tell Vivian that Nona would be proud. She always said that girl understood the business better than anyone. Understanding the business. That's what it had always been about. Now everyone else understood it too. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.